Hello and welcome. My name is Kimberly Larson, and today I would like to invite you to meet a very special guest of mine. His name is Erikson, and he's got a lovely photo there, deep in thought. The topic of today's discussion is Erikson and psychosocial theory. In this session, we'll be introducing Erikson's constructs of 8 stages of development. His major assumptions, problems, and important contributions and criticisms of his theories relating to their usefulness to society today. Born in 1902 in Germany, Erik began his lifelong journey and commitment to investigating human development throughout the travels in Europe that he did, resulting with his settling in the US in 1933, where he did a great majority of his research. Erik was greatly influenced by Freudian psychology, and he became a key figure in development of psychology that will be explained in this presentation. Slide 2. During the mid-20th century, the field of child development grew into a large discipline that resulted with many theories focusing on children's psychological development, from an infant child to an adult. If you have a look at this lovely diagram here, you can see where a baby is progressing all the way through various stages of life, from a baby or an infant to a toddler, a teenager, an adult, and eventually an elderly person. According to psychoanalytics perspective, children go through a range of stages, particularly 8 stages as shown in this picture, where they confront both biological and social expectations. The way in which conflicts resolve determines the young person's ability to learn and develop into a healthy, functioning adult. Sigmund Freud was the founder of the psychoanalytic movement, and Erikson learnt from his works and extended them further. Erikson's views differed slightly from Freud's in that he believed that the ego is a key part of development, and that development needs to be understood in relation to each culture's situations. And I'll be going into a little bit more detail about the culture and background of each person in this presentation. In this picture, you can see that at each stage of development, there are 8 virtues which result from completion of each phase. Note that Erikson believed that the stages were not mutually exclusive of one another, but in fact, they did develop simultaneously, which really was influenced by what sort of environment and circumstance they had. So if you look on the left to the right, you can see the virtues of hope, will, purpose, competence, fidelity, love, care, and wisdom that we'll be talking about in a bit more detail. And I'm just going to show you a short 4-minute video here about the 8 stages of development. Next slide. This chart shows a differentiation between each of the 8 stages of development, from an infant, the very bottom box in a pinky red colour where it says trust versus mistrust, all the way up to older adult bracket, which is the very top in the yellow, integrity versus despair. You can see an arrow which on the right hand corner which goes upwards and says as the child develops through the stages, their level of thinking and their cognitive ability, they all increase in complexity. This will be explained a bit more. As each stage progresses, the child will think in a more complex manner, and that will be explained as mentioned. While the theory has been widely accepted by psychoanalytic theorists, this perspective is slowly disappearing from mainstream research due to constraints of research that focuses more on individual children rather than considering all the other methods. Nevertheless, for the sake of the topic, we will still discuss the impact of Erikson's theory as it stands. Erikson suggested that each individual faces what was called a development crisis, which is a conflict that poses either a healthy or an unhealthy alternative. The way in which the person resolves each crisis impacts on their own self-image and their personal development, and as mentioned, it really is affected by the sort of choices they make, which is related to the circumstances that each individual child is put under or is surrounded with, and also the people that they surround themselves with. Next slide. Stage 1, trust versus mistrust. So here we're beginning to talk in detail about each of the 8 stages that children are going through. The first one, birth to 12 to 18 months. We're talking about a baby until a little toddler, where the virtue is hope. In the first stage, the children are growing and they're also developing their sense of trust with their caregivers. The premise is that all babies require a nurturing, loving and caring relationship with the caregiver or parents in order to grow in a positive way, developing self-confidence and trust. And this, for babies, starts from the very basic sort of things like eye contact, physical contact, hugging, kissing, picking up, talking to and praising. So this child on the left, you can see it seems to be a very healthy and happy child. The mother's giving him a nice big kiss and holding him close. On the right hand, you can see a baby perhaps that's looking a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more not as close to the parent. Maybe they're not sure whether to trust the adult. Perhaps this adult hasn't developed a close bond. There are many sort of background ideas that could lead to a child not having that much trust. A child who grows up without positive trust and caring, perhaps those sorts of children have been abused physically or mentally, or perhaps have been abandoned as a baby or not given that relevant attention when they're growing up. This could impact negatively on their confidence and their self-esteem. For example, let's just say John, 10 years old, who grew up in a verbally and mentally abusive relationship with the parents at home, may not be likely to grow in the same manner as Peter, who had a different upbringing where his parents were always there for him physically, emotionally, giving their time with him and playing with him. These two scenarios give an example where children's development of emotions and trust can form from their own personal situations and experiences. The particular virtue is hope here. So children, we know a lot of children who have perhaps some learning difficulties, or perhaps their cognitive functions have not developed. It could be a mixture of reasons, physical, social, cultural. Could be also elements of trauma. Perhaps children who've been exposed to a high level of traumatic experience from a young age could find it a lot more difficult to catch up to their peers of the same age. We won't go into too much of that right now. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This group of toddlers are from 18 months to 3 years old, and their virtue is will. During this time, these young people are developing their motor abilities, asking themselves the question, is it okay to be me? They develop first interests, for example, sport, music, dance and art, whatever comes natural to them and what sort of things they like best. They gain their muscular control and coordination and also begin to learn to be self-sufficient. They develop physical skills like walking, grasping, controlling their sphincter muscles, so being potty trained. If the child is supported physically and emotionally, they are more likely to succeed and gain confidence. However, if they're not supported, or their parents exercise too much control or pressure on them to succeed in an unrealistic manner, they might feel shame or self-doubt about their abilities that can affect them negatively later in life. The virtue here is will. I think that everyone can relate to knowing someone, whether it be a child who is in self-doubt, and perhaps you can think about what sort of environment that child's been exposed to when they were growing up. Next slide. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. We're talking about children between 3 to 6 years old, so they're progressing from a toddler into a young child, and a young child who is just beginning their primary school years, which is extremely significant. These children have just started, about 5 years old, have started school, and this is a completely new step for them as well. These children are gaining assertion and confidence to take on new tasks and also to problem solve new things. They are gaining the ability to take more risks and also learn how to do more physical things than their previous stage. For example, tying their own shoes, talking with complete sentences, putting their own clothes on, and just exercising leadership and autonomy. It can also include speaking, counting, and zipping things up. Once again, if the parents or caregivers put too much pressure on the children, the positive development could result in feelings of guilt if they fail. And of course, children are learning about success and failure. This could result with negative behaviours, including aggression or hitting and yelling at others as a result of frustration of failing the given task. On the left, you can see a child who appears extremely happy and confident, who's climbing a tree, perhaps with the support of family and friends. And on the right, you can see a young child sort of cowering behind a chair, looking extremely nervous and not really sure what to think. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority. This is a very important stage. The child is actually turning from 6 to 12 years. So during the age of 7 to 11 years, we can remember back to when we were learning about the concrete operational stage, where children are beginning to piece together and develop a system of logical thinking and reasoning, which is not so apparent in the earlier years. In this time, the children are able to weigh up the positives and the negatives and make an informed decision about something. So the virtue here is competence. So during this time, the child is asking themselves, can I make it in the world? Regarding success and learning new skills, they are also gaining confidence and developing their own special talents. The dangers are that a child can feel inferior, which can grow and fester if it's not addressed in a positive way by the influences, the parents, the teachers, and the friends. So I think we can relate to knowing a young child who it's so very crucial at this time. If they are not supported in a positive way, perhaps they're making a lot of mistakes. They're feeling quite low. If this isn't picked up, and perhaps their parents and teachers are supporting them, they can actually go through quite a difficult time getting into the teenage years. The virtue for this is confidence. Stage 5, identity versus role confusion. So this child is now developing into an adolescent, which starts traditionally at 12, 13 years old until 19 years. But as we all know that puberty can hit anywhere from, even these days, from 10 years old and onwards. So even though adolescence is from 13 years plus, children's bodies and the way that they are viewing themselves as a person and as an individual is actually occurring at a much earlier rate. It's very important for us to note this. Adolescents and teenagers ask themselves, who am I and what can I be? They become extremely concerned about what others think of them and what their role in society could be. Their ego develops, and they also have conflicting views of who they think they are, but eventually they will develop a strong sense of self. Erikson was the person who helped coin the term identity crisis, a reconciliation between the person one has become and the one that they think society expects them to be. They will learn to decide on their principles regarding religion and politics, two extremely large topics. And, we're talking about peer pressure here. Children are starting to develop physically, and they are starting to look at themselves a lot more critically. They're comparing themselves to people. They're comparing themselves to friends. A lot of bullying can occur during this time. So it's quite a time where things could be quite damaging if not handled in the most appropriate way. Children might start to be dating each other, developing some romantic feelings, and some other children may be feeling like they're left out because they haven't developed at that stage. And also, this is a very important stage to talk about role modelling. So the sort of people that young people are looking up to, whether it be their parents, their friends, it could be people on television, it could be their most popular pop stars. So, hopefully not people like Miley Cyrus and things like that. But as you know, children are extremely influenced by what they see in the magazines and on television. So it's a very important time to talk to those young people and get there, support them in every single way. And of course, at this stage, these teenagers may be making silly mistakes and they may be making bad choices. They might be hanging around with the wrong crowd and drinking. So the most important thing at this stage is to support those people and ensure that they know that you're there for them. So that was a bit of a long one. I think adolescence is quite a tricky and development complex stage. And everyone knows that when they were an adolescent, the sort of trouble and problems that they went through. But anyway, we'll move on to stage 6, which is intimacy versus isolation. Love. Young adulthood from 20 to 40 years old, these young people are asking ourselves, will I find love? Or they just want to fit in. They're also scared of rejection, and their egos cannot bear the pain of being turned down when it comes to romance. I think we've all been there, and some of us are still there. Young people will learn to isolate and destroy any forces that are different to their own beliefs, in order to forge their identities. Some people will forge lifelong relationships, commitments of love and marriage. However, others may not be able to make the same commitments. Some of them will never find love or never want to find love. Some of them will remain in isolation. So of course there's a silent pressure of being single and unmarried, as I'm sure you are all aware of, especially in certain cultures where marrying is extremely important, and of course the next stage is having children. Although there are many changing views, so today, as we all know, people are slowly changing their thoughts. A lot of people are delaying marriage, a lot of people are deciding not to ever get married or have children, and that is extremely important to note. And the particular virtue here is love, as I mentioned. So we're getting to stage 7, which is towards the end of the scale. Generativity versus stagnation, middle adulthood. So people from their mid-20s to even their mid-60s. So it's a large part and portion of development. And the virtue here is care. So generativity versus stagnation. So basically, Erikson viewed generativity versus stagnation, this sort of stage. It's talking about a struggle against stagnation. So generativity, he viewed it as a concern for establishing and guiding the next generation, which stems from a sense of optimism about humanity. People of this age are asking themselves the question, can I make my life count? They will guide the next generation and reflect back on their own lives to acknowledge that it actually did have meaning. There is a sense of productivity, accomplishment, happiness, a sense of unity, and also relinquishing of roles to give opportunity to the younger generation. People of this age will have more leisure time. They will focus less on the priorities that they used to focus on. They will have changing views and thoughts. Also, the stagnation aspect could be shown through elderly people who have not been able to reflect in a positive way on their lives, those who've been depressed, isolated, and in a bit of a rut, which I'll describe a bit later. Stagnation, of course, is a state of inactivity and perhaps pessimism. It also represents that there is no more growth. So, of course, all those younger years developing from baby to an adult have all finished, and there is no more change. It is in a state of stagnation. On the left, you can see a lovely photo of what you could have guessed to be a grandfather with child and grandchildren, and extremely happy at that part of their life where things are all relaxing, and time is precious, time with loved ones. And on the right you can see a picture of the community. So the need to contribute to a society and also the community is important. Stage 8, finally, we talk about ego, integrity versus despair. So we're talking about late adulthood, from 65 until death. The virtue here is wisdom. We're talking about reflection and acceptance of one's life. So when a person becomes elderly, they're retiring, they're starting to think about what they've done in their life. They're starting to really appreciate the sort of things that have happened to them. There's a sense of fulfillment and retrospection, so looking back over the years, that the life has been worth living. But also we talked about it can lead to integrity, or it could also lead to despair and depression. So we know that some people who are caught in a rut, perhaps they've had a very long life, but it's been a difficult life. They could fall victim to despair and feelings of loneliness. I think we all know a lot of people who are elderly who have become quite sad and bitter, perhaps in a depressed state, loss of hope. An example I had was I used to have a neighbour who was a very lovely lady. She used to look after my cats when I was not able to look after them. As she grew older, she got more and more in despair. She started to get a little bit, woe is me, my back hurts, my legs hurt, everything hurts, complaining all the time. And eventually her family dropped off and they stopped visiting her, and actually got to a point where she just lost hope in life. And she used to call out every day, really loudly, scream and cry every day. And I do remember that. It was quite a large impact on me because I didn't know what to do. This is an example of despair. On the other hand, you can see in the picture here, the lady on the left with her carer here, she's extremely happy. It looks like she's been looked after. and she's had a bit of hope in her life. And the guy on the right, you can see in a wheelchair looking down, perhaps in a high-level care facility, who maybe can't move his legs and can't walk. So it is an extremely traumatic time, not only a happy time, but it could be very traumatic for a lot of elderly people who are actually starting to realise that, you know, this is it, this is the rest of my life, and this is how I'm going to be going. Finally, we're going to talk about how does Erikson's theory link to children's development today. So because today we don't have enough time to do some of these case studies, we're going to focus on these perhaps in the next sessions. The same with the summary of the key stages. But what I'm going to just emphasise is psychosocial conflict does result in a kind of change in human development. And this sort of theme we're going to be exploring in the next couple of sessions. So this is it's a large topic, and we'll be exploring them bit by bit. But if I just move on, I'd like to just ask everyone quickly, now that you've learned a little bit about Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, we're going to do a quick quiz. And in a way, it is a little bit of a prior knowledge exercise based on what you've learnt just today. And I'd like you to do it individually without sharing any of the results. And what we'll do at the end of this session is we'll go through those results together, and we'll also have a bit of a class discussion so you can understand what the differences between each of the stages is and how it actually relates to young people's development today. The first question here, I'll just give you an example, and I'm not going to tell you the answer. Jane, a preschooler, insists on dressing herself each morning for school, even though she generally selects mismatching outfits. She cannot do her buttons up correctly. She wears her shoes on the wrong feet. When her mother tries to dress Jane or put her in her outfit, Jane brushes her mother off and insists on doing it herself. What stage of psychosocial development best describes Jane's behaviour, and also why? I guess you could ask yourself. First, there's trust versus mistrust. Second, there's autonomy versus shame and doubt. Third, there's initiative versus guilt. And fourth, there's industry versus inferiority. And I think what we all want you to do here is to think about not only the stage, but the age level. So I don't want to give you too many clues there, but yeah. Conclusion. So what were the contributions and criticisms of psychosocial theory? Well, first of all, lifespan stages, ego identity themes are actually relevant today. And of course, the concept of the identity crisis, so a child's functioning as part of an adolescent experience, links to how they become later in life. And finally, if I come to the conclusion here. So we've seen and understood a little bit about Erikson's psychosocial theory and stages of development, relation to previous theorists, including Sigmund Freud. The lifespan stages that have been identified by Erikson illustrates ego identity themes that are on the whole still relevant today. For example, children learning to be autonomous, individualistic, show initiative, develop trust, develop strong identities, learn about intimacy, and develop integrity and wisdom. The concept of the identity crisis is important, and it has a large impact on how the individual develops into fully functioning adults. There are several criticisms of Erikson's theories, including that his constructs were difficult to measure, as his research was conducted on individuals. There were few tools for measuring psychosocial trauma. We were talking about the trauma earlier. Perhaps there are still a few gaps today. Erikson did have limited research to support his view that ego identity is a prerequisite for forming intimate relationships, or that crises occur in a fixed universal sequence. It appears that each stage of development has an impact on the next stage. The stages are not mutually exclusive, so people can develop at different rates, and several stages can develop simultaneously depending on the person's physical, social, and emotional environments. How does this relate to our current society? Well, the model can be used as a tool for teachers today to support students as they face conflicts, challenges, risks, and opportunities as they develop individual personalities, behaviours, customs, and senses of self. So, in conclusion, we've come to the end of just this presentation. As mentioned, you've seen that video already, you've done a quiz. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the answers to our quiz for the next 10 minutes. And as a bit of homework, I'm going to be getting you to have a look at Sandlot Seminar 4.1. Just do the reading, have a look at the particular anecdote, and I'd like you to start to think about the questions. And before next class, I'd like you to answer these questions. Number 1, what elements in the supermarket episode might contribute to Stephen's sense of autonomy? And number 2 is what elements might contribute to shame and doubt? But thank you very much. You've been a wonderful, active listening audience today, and I look forward to many deep and meaningful discussions in the weeks to come. So thank you very much for that.